DeviantArt is considered to be the world's largest art community with over 100 million registered users and with more than 650 million pieces of art uploaded to the site. But despite its extreme success, if you somehow got to the point of using DeviantArt on a daily basis, it means you have failed in life at some point. DeviantArt has a long list and history of users using the platform to promote their weird, inappropriate fantasies, normally featuring characters from popular cartoon shows where these characters are and very much look age. Every day hundreds if not thousands of this type of content is uploaded to the website, which is a big problem as many of the active users that frequent this online space aren't even over 18. Even though small caution steps had been taken to reduce the exposure of this type of content to minors, it seems that more and more they sort of neglect this problem and just sweep it under the rug like it doesn't exist, even though it's very much real. When you allow this type of content, mostly unmoderated on your platform, it's only natural that groups of deranged individuals who find this type of content start consuming it and actively creating communities around it. And that brings us to today's topic, Cowboy Alchemist, a user who not only engaged in this type of degeneracy, but went as far as to produce and openly endorse it within the community he created. From posting fanfics where his OC would engage in inappropriate activities with fictional female characters, to being the subject of a 100-page document accusing him of some very disturbing stuff. Cowboy Alchemist claims to be a successful writer, with some of his fanfics being read by thousands of people online on websites like fanfiction.net. But what defines success in the writing world isn't just the number of people who read your stuff. I mean, yeah, it's a big part of it, but it's not everything. The quality of your writing matters too. And let me tell you, Cowboy Alchemist's writing is not exactly made for everyone. I personally find it unoriginal, overly repetitive, and boring as fuck. Most of his fanfics are based on popular cartoon shows like The Owl House, Amphibia, and Gravity Falls. And that's completely fine. Having a base for your story, a starting point, is normal for fanfictions. But the problem is that his plots are basically just the original story with one key difference. The main character is replaced and pushed to the side by one of Cowboy Alchemist's original characters, aka his OCs. Some chapters of some of these fanfics are literally just retellings of actual episodes from the show, which makes the fanfic insanely unoriginal and boring to read. Like, why the f am I going to read a fanfic about the exact plot of a show I already watched? On top of that, the original characters' inserts into these fanfics are really poorly written, almost as if a child wrote them. They are described as overpowered as hell, always the voice of reason, always morally superior, and always with some tragic backstory so the reader can sympathize with them. So, unlike the actual shows where the characters start flawed, make mistakes, and slowly develop emotionally, Cowboy Alchemist's protagonists are basically perfect from the start. But what really kills me and makes these fanfics unbearable to read is the fact that most female side characters from the original shows are constantly portrayed as being interested in with his original characters. Which obviously raises the question, are these OCs actually just self-inserts Cowboy Alchemist uses to fantasize about these female characters? In his Owl House-inspired fanfic called The Seventh Son, the protagonist is named Booker Bridges. He basically takes the place of Luz Nasija as the main character, pushing her to be a sidekick. Throughout the fanfic, there are countless moments where not only Luz but also Amity show romantic interest in Booker Bridges. The thing is, Luz and Amity are canonically a couple, and yeah, I get it. Fanfics don't have to follow canon 100%. That's the whole point of fanfiction. But wouldn't it make more sense for Booker to have a new original female character that's romantically interested in him, instead of just hijacking the most important relationship in the show? To me, this just screams cringy self-insert power fantasy, where the author inserts himself into the plot and makes every female character obsessed with him for no reason. Another example of this is Cowboy Alchemist's Gravity Falls inspired fanfic called Weirder Things. In this fanfic, the main character is yet another original character named Patrick Pines. And just like in the previous fanfic, Dipper and Mabel, the original main characters of Gravity Falls, get pushed aside and turned into sidekicks for Patrick. Patrick. This is especially noticeable with Dipper. In the fanfic, he makes significantly stupider decisions compared to the show, while Patrick conveniently becomes the new voice of reason, the role Dipper originally had in Gravity Falls. Patrick, just like Booker Bridges, is described as having a somewhat tragic backstory. He is strong, brave, morally upright, and eventually revealed to be the key to defeating Bill Cipher. Oh, and of course every single female finds him attractive. In this fanfic, Patrick's main love interest is Wendy, who just like in the show is years old. While nothing extremely happens in the main story itself, the follow-up installments of this fanfic take things much further. These follow-up works are often labeled as fics, meaning they primarily focus on explicit romantic scenarios between the characters, sometimes described in a way that many readers would find deeply uncomfortable, to the point where it could generally be considered torture to read some of this. I didn't read much of these fanfics because, as you can imagine, this isn't exactly what I like to read. But for research purposes, I forced myself to read one from top to bottom. And oh boy, I regret it, okay? The one I read is called Lifeguard's Reward, and it takes place in the Gravity Falls universe. It's about how Wendy becomes a lifeguard at the swimming pool in Gravity Falls and decides to reward her boyfriend Patrick Pines with some time. To make matters even more unsettling and uncomfortable, the character Jacqueline Thomas from Star vs. the Forces of Evil also partakes in these scenarios. The way these actions are described is super detailed in a very gross and over-the-top way, to the point where this fanfic makes women romance novels feel really tame. Grasping the waistband, Wendy yanked the legs. The redhead gasped when
Patrick's fat, brutal sprang out and hit her forehead.
So, as you can probably guess, the major problem I have with the fanfictions is that they feature characters who are labeled as teenagers in their respective shows, engaging in highly activities. Even though Cowboy Alchemist makes sure to mention that these characters are aged up in the fanfics, it honestly just feels like he's doing that to avoid repercussions. And the other major problem I have is that not only this Patrick Pines character, but pretty much all of his protagonist OCs feel like blatant self-inserts of him, which gives me the impression that he uses these characters as ways to insert himself into these fictional worlds and place himself in relationships with these female characters. So, I think this pretty much gave you a good idea of what Cowboy Alchemist does and the problems I have with it. So, in the following section of this video, I will be going over the various allegations that were made against him in that earlier mentioned 100-page document. The document will be left in the description in case you wanna take a look at it and come to your own conclusions. I will not be following the exact order of the allegations posted in that document. Instead, I will first go over the allegations that I think have enough evidence to claim that they are true, and then later I will go over the ones that, in my opinion, don't have enough information to be fully confirmed. So, starting with his Discord server and the two channels inside it. As many of you know, Discord is quite literally the worst place for a miner to be after games, mostly because the moderation on servers that have channels usually doesn't include any real age verification, and in Cowboy Alchemist server it was no different. The channels didn't have any sort of verification whatsoever, and that anyone could basically access them. In these channels, users would share images where cartoon characters like Anne from Amphibia, Lenny and Laurie from the Loud House, and countless others would engage in you-know-what activities. Sadly, I wasn't able to join his server and confirm these allegations myself, but I was able to get in contact with people who were actually in the server and who confirmed that these channels did exist and this type of content was being shared there. And considering the fact that Cowboy Alchemist himself deleted these channels from his server after the document was posted, I think it's fair to say that this allegation has a good chance of being true. Speaking of these channels, I also think it's really disturbing that most, if not all of the characters featured in the images posted there are portrayed as underage in their respective shows, and many of these images were posted by Cowboy Alchemist himself. Before you make assumptions, no, I'm not calling him a pedophile. But I think everyone can agree that there's something inherently wrong with sexualizing cartoon characters from children's shows. And this is something Cowboy Alchemist clearly knew was controversial, because he would get defensive every single time someone called him out about it in his server. His usual response was to claim that the characters were aged up in the images, but first of all, the characters were not aged up at all. They were exactly the same as the show, but with just bigger tits. And second of all, he would get extremely passive-aggressive whenever someone brought this topic up, clearly showing some type of insecurity about it. At some point, there were so many people calling him out on this topic that he made a post on his server banning all types of sexual content that featured the characters. The thing is, he didn't enforce the rule at all, and he himself would break it constantly. So if you make a rule but don't enforce it when someone breaks it, why does that rule even exist? Apart from looking at some very unsettling images in his Discord server, another thing you could do there was suggest and discuss ideas with other fellow users about his fanfics, or even point out things he could improve. But honestly, you would be better off just shutting the fuck up, because Cowboy Alchemist would not take your suggestions into consideration and would often get upset just because you mentioned something you disliked about his fanfics. On the rare occasions where he actually did take criticism into consideration, he would still make you feel like absolute shit and be a total jerk about it.
Alright, it's finally done. After God, I don't know, whenever that stupid video review came out. But it's finally over. I've gone back, took all of the advice given, and updated Season 1 of The Seventh Son. It's finally over, and now I'm going to take a break from writing. Give myself a week before I feel up for more updates.
Regarding his DeviantArt, there are also some minor things he can be called out for, like the fact that he traces some of his fan art from other media, and that his DeviantArt favorites tab used to be flooded with AI-generated images of the previously mentioned characters, often with some very unrealistic body proportions. And I think this pretty much sums up all the allegations that I believe are true based on the information we have. Now I'm going to briefly talk about the ones that I think are a bit more dubious. The document claims that he is a pedophile, a homophobic, and even masochistic, which are things that I don't quite agree with after taking a look at the information used to back these claims up. I don't really like to play devil's advocate, especially when I'm talking about people who are basically lol cows, but I do think it's a stretch to label Cowboy Alchemist with words that carry this much weight. The allegation of him being a pedophile comes from something that is pretty obvious. He shares a lot of media, ranging from fanfics to artwork of underage characters partaking in explicit activities. In my opinion, even though this behavior is definitely creepy and disgusting, I don't think it automatically makes someone a word-for-word pedophile. There's a clear barrier between fiction and the real world. One could argue, however, that this type of behavior might indicate much more concerning tendencies, ones that could eventually lead an individual to partake in criminal actions. But as it stands, calling him a pedophile is a bit of a stretch. The misogyny and racist allegations mostly come from the way he portrays the aforementioned female characters in his fanfics, and also because of his peculiar love for using the word which is slang used to refer to attractive older women. According to the document, words like that are degrading to women, and the fact that he portrays these female characters mostly as objects supposedly reflects his personal views about real-life women. I guess that's one way to look at it, but in my opinion, this has a lot more to do with a very obvious addiction rather than some deep hatred of women. I mean, the dude has 22,000 images in his favorites, and most of them are either straight up or something highly suggestive. So it's probably safe to say that this guy spends a significant amount of his time just gooning. But again, labeling him as a misogynist just because he consumes a lot of and uses the term feels like a bit of a stretch, doesn't it? As for the homophobia claims, they mostly come from the fact that Cowboy Alchemist would not allow any sort of male content in his Discord server, which is pretty ironic considering he would allow content. And while this might look suspicious at first glance, I still think it's an exaggeration to immediately label him as a homophobic. Since Cowboy Alchemist is basically a chronically online gooner who built a community around sharing the type of content he personally enjoys, it's very possible that he simply didn't want content he wasn't interested in seeing posted there. In other words, it probably had more to do with what he likes to goon to rather than some hatred of people. Lastly, the last thing I want to address is the self-insert issue, something that the document goes into in full detail. As I mentioned before, the OCs in Cowboy Alchemist fanfics seem like blatant attempts to force himself into the plot of these shows so he can live out his fantasies with his fictional crushes. And even though he will swear on his grandma's soul that they are not self-inserts, at the end of the day you can't really blame people for thinking otherwise. All of these OCs follow a very specific pattern that I already mentioned before. They take the place of the main character, they solve most of their problems by punching people while somehow also being the voice of reason at the same time, they are given some kind of bullshit power that makes them special and the key to defeating the main villain, and there's always some kind of female character that wants to be in a romantic relationship with said character. So basically, the fanfics stop being about the original plot of a specific show and instead become about how awesome and overpowered my OC is. There are also some messages of his retrieved from his Discord server that showcase him glazing the fuck of his original characters. Patrick watched Dipper get in trouble with all the girls he hit on during the road trip. Finally unlocked your Pine's charm and couldn't handle it, huh? Man, how do you handle attracting all the girls you meet? It's like you just become a chick magnet all of a sudden, and I've seen you handle it all like a champ. Can you please teach me? Kneels down and puts his hand on his shoulders. I have been waiting to hear those words from you for so long. Now, this on its own wouldn't really be that big of a problem. A lot of writers like their own characters and hype them up a little too much sometimes. The issue is that Cowboy Alchemist also writes the fanfics where these same characters are placed in very stiff situations, which kinda reinforces the idea that these OCs exist mainly so he can insert himself into these worlds and interact with the characters he likes in a much more personal way. And when you combine that with everything else we already talked about, it becomes pretty clear why so many people believe these characters are just very obvious self-inserts.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Okay, so you might be asking, if I agree so much with this section of the document, then why the f am I putting it among the claims that I think are false? Well, it's because there's really no way for us to be 100% sure that these characters are actually self-inserts. The only person who truly knows that is obviously Cowboy Alchemist himself, and he claims that they are not. So even though I personally think that they very much look like self-inserts, I can't just come up to you and tell you that they are when I don't have concrete evidence of such. But the criticism still stands. Self-insert or not, the original characters in his smut fanfics absolutely should not interact inappropriately with the previously mentioned characters.
I'd say that to her face.